Well, the Chancellor, George Osborne, outlined a dramatic shift in Britain's cyber defences today as he warned IS is working to hack into British infrastructure networks such as hospitals and air traffic control systems. Speaking at GCHQ in Cheltenham, the Chancellor said Britain would begin carrying out its own offensive attacks against Islamic State online. Sky's Lisa Holland reports.
The threats to our country in cyberspace come from individual hackers, to criminal gangs, to terrorist groups and hostile powers. We will defend ourselves, but we will also take the fight to you.
The Chancellor is promising a fight back against cyber terrorists. And it is the government's listening centre at GCHQ which will be on the front line. He's raised the spectre of online attacks against the electricity network, the air traffic control system, even Britain's hospitals, which could wreak untold damage. ISIS's ambitions, he said, do not stop at using the internet for propaganda purposes.
They have not so far been able to use it to kill people by attacking our infrastructure through cyber attack. They do not yet have that capability, but we know they want it.
The Chancellor has announced a new cyber security plan, doubling investment to £1.9 billion over the next 5 years. He wants to develop a single national cyber centre by 2016, train the next generation of Britain's digital security workforce, and give £165 million in a defence and cyber innovation fund to invest in cybersecurity startups. One aviation official told Sky News, in order to outsmart the terrorists, Britain's spies must think the unthinkable.
Aircraft manufacturers are extremely diligent in protecting aircraft. But in our business, we never say everything is 100%. But I think some of the best minds at Boeing and Airbus are working to prevent this.
But some experts say IS is a long way from achieving a doomsday scenario.
ISIS don't really have cyber capability at the moment, but the problem with this is that you can acquire cyber capability relatively quickly if you want to. A lot of the tools that you need are actually out there on the internet.
Cybercrime is becoming increasingly common. Sony Pictures has been targeted and personal details were recently obtained from the telecoms company TalkTalk. The government says cyber breaches have doubled in the last year. It clearly believes attack is the best form of defence. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
Well, let's get more now on cyber warfare. Live from Washington, we're joined by Sean Henry. He's the former Executive Assistant Director of the FBI's Criminal Cyber Response and Services Branch, now Head of Services at the cybersecurity company CrowdStrike. Joining us from central London is Simon Edwards, a former cybersecurity expert who's worked for the MOD and NATO and is the principal consultant for Dambella. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. If I could ask you first, Mr. Henry, how close do you think we are from a potentially fatal cyber attack by the Islamic State?
You know, I've been talking about this threat for a long time, and quite honestly, we know that they've been probing networks. They certainly have the intent, they have the motivation, and they're working to acquire better capability. They have some capability now. There's a whole generation of jihadis that are growing up with technology, and the leadership of IS and other jihadi organizations have called for this new generation to use their skills to target critical infrastructure. So this is something that is absolutely coming, and the ability to better detect and defend the networks is absolutely critical right now if we want to avoid a catastrophic type of attack.
Simon Edwards, where do you think the vulnerabilities are in the UK to this sort of attack?
I think a lot of it comes out of, particularly from a government perspective, is government has always worked very much in silos, and they've got to start working together and really pulling together the threat intelligence that has been gathered across the whole of the UK government and across organisations as well, and really about pooling evidence and pooling information so that if one thing is seen in one area, it's very quickly related across to all the other partners within that cyber alliance of information.
I mean, Mr. Henry, what are the sort of things that a terrorist might want to do that would directly attack a population?
Well, there are a number of things terrorists can do. once they access a network. Certainly the theft of information, the theft of data is one thing we've seen recently. You mentioned TalkTalk earlier, but increasingly the adversaries' capability to disrupt networks, to destroy networks, similar to what we saw in North Korea do to Sony, we saw happen in Aramco by actors there, and the potential to actually change data, to manipulate data that people are relying on the networks. Adversaries with the depth and breadth of access that we've seen historically have the ability to do those things. Whether ISIS has that capability today is really up for debate, but they can absolutely obtain that, and they are working to create and develop it internally. So the risk is high, the impact is high. We have to make sure we mitigate the threat.
And Mr. Edwards, the Chancellor was speaking at GCHQ. That's where he made the announcement of more money going on cybersecurity. Do the authorities, places like GCHQ, do they also need more legal powers in order to protect us, perhaps by encroaching on some of our digital rights?
It's obviously a very, very controversial subject in terms of whether we should allow the government to see more. I personally agree that it should be used more. I mean, one of the keys to being able to mine very, very large sets of data that we use in our own technologies, as does a colleague over in the States, that we need lots and lots and lots of data to be able to data mine into it properly. We need good data and we need bad data, and only then can we work out where the bad stuff is. So I think giving GCHQ all the information that they need to do their job is absolutely critical.
And what do you think in the United States, Mr. Henry? We had Edward Snowden making his revelations, which led to a certain amount of outcry about the power of the state in America and the state in the UK to get involved in what's going on online. Is there a need for greater intrusion by the authorities in the interest of security?
Well, I've worked heavily in U.S. government policy, and I worked with the Brits quite extensively in this as well. I think that Simon's original comment about the ability for government agencies to work collaboratively across agencies, the SIGINT communities like GCHQ and the Intel communities, MI5 and MI6 and others, even law enforcement with the NCA, they've got to share that intelligence. And the issue that's on the table is always going to be privacy. I think that when you talk about enhanced capabilities for the government, that the citizens are ultimately going to make a determination, because security is a balance with privacy, and you're never going to have 100% of both. In order for GCHQ and other Intel communities to have greater access, civilians are going to have to acknowledge that and recognize that there might be some encroachment on privacy. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're only focused on the bad guys, the evil people, but that's not always going to happen. There'll be some leakage. So citizens are going to make that decision ultimately.
Yeah, and Mr. Edwards, I mean, the leakage is a problem, but there we had Rashida Dati telling me that there wasn't enough cooperation between security services, but the more security services that get involved, the more the possibility of leakage or exploitation by someone actually opposed to those very authorities, I suppose.
It's certainly a possibility. I mean, the minute you start to put data into one place, then you're obviously asking for it to be captured. But I think that, having worked for Her Majesty's government, I know that we're very, very good at protecting core data that sits within the very big databases of HMRC, of DWP, of, these things that hold details of all of the citizens within the UK. And they're very, very good at protecting those sort of things. I think what the most important thing really, and where I want to see George Osborne's money going into, is into personnel and into training and into education, because I think the government has a real problem that it'll train a civil servant in cybersecurity and how to analyse data, how to find that needle in the haystack, but then he can earn 2-3 times as much money working in the private sector than he's ever going to make during working for the government. And so I think staff retention and ensuring that the government can maintain the right skill sets is also very, very key to it, because at the end of the day, you need skilled people to be sitting in front of those screens to be able to look for that needle in the haystack when there's a ton of other data coming through, and you've got to try and find that one slither of information. It's an incredibly difficult job to do, and it requires training and it requires education. And it requires consistency. And I think that's what the government needs to do more than anything else, is really invest in the people. They're the people that can really protect it. We can have all the best technology in the world, but people are key to it.
This is Sky News Tonight. Lots more to come.